everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every week, photographers from all over the country meet here to connect, inspire, and create. Our guest speakers share their tips and techniques, infuse creativity and inspiration to help us all improve our photography skills. The schedule for upcoming presentations is on my website at lindanickell.com, as well as the links to previous sessions on the Happiness Hour YouTube channel. Tonight's guest is Sean Stone. Sean is a filmmaker, writer, actor, and an editorial photographer based in both Dallas, Texas, and Los Angeles, California. His company, No Moss Productions, is a full-service media production company. But in tonight's presentation, Perspective Shift, Black and White Photography, Sean will talk about the power of black and white photography on the user and the viewer, covering the origins, impact, and effects of black and white photography in the modern age, and how it remains a valuable tool. If you're on Instagram, you can find him at Sean Allen Stone Photo, and you can connect with him through his website nomossproductions.com. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Sean.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm excited. I told you that earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, I told you that you're 165 tonight, okay? But for about 100 of those people, I've been looking for someone to do black and white. And a few people said they would. And then the last minute, they said, can I change my topic? Sure, I don't have a problem with that. And when you said black and white, I'm like, let's see if he sticks with it. And you didn't change it. So I'm really excited because we're going to get to add this to the Happiness Hour YouTube library project. So thank you for doing that. And off camera, I think I just mentioned you were an attendee. You came in to support Chris Burke's presentation. Did you know him? Were y'all friends or just somebody that you followed on Instagram?
So Chris and me have a really interesting relationship. So I was on a TV show that shot in Austin, Texas as an actor, and friends of his were on that show. And so we had some mutual friends in common. And so I started to talk to them and they were like, oh, you know Chris? And I was like, I don't know Chris. And then I talked to my brother-in-law and I was like, yeah, I mean, there was this great guy. They were talking about Chris Burke and he's like, oh, he's my neighbor. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, he lives like right there. And I was like, that was crazy. So he's the neighbor of my brother and sister-in-law. And so we just met. And so when we're in Austin, we drop on by and try to say hello. But he's a great guy. And I'm glad I know him. He invited me to this thing and it's just so great to be here and meet all you folks.
Yeah, it was just one of those things, I always ask people to drop their websites in, especially their websites, but in Instagram, so I can go stalk and see what people are doing. And I did that with yours, and I thought, I wonder if he would, and you did. So, and here you are. So thank you for coming. I glossed over your bio. So what did I miss? Feel free to fill in the blanks because this is your moment to shine.
I'm Owen. Yeah, no, I think that you pretty much covered it. I mean, I think to get more like transparent about my background, I got into photography because my mom did it. I think honestly is what kind of turned me on to it. I am an actor. I have been on in plays and on some TV shows and things like that. You can check out my IMDb page if you want to. You can watch shows that I was in if you want to or not. That's fine too. But
yeah. So what's the biggest thing that you've done that we might?
Yeah, so I'm on a show with Pierce Brosnan I think it's on AMC right now. It was originally on FX. Or no, it was originally on AMC. But it's on Hulu right now, actually, for streaming. And it's called The Sun. It's a Western set in two different time periods, so the 1800s and the early 1900s. It's based on a book. So you can check that out. It's not too shabby of a little show. I don't play a nice guy. So if you meet me here and you're like, that guy was so nice. I'm not like that on the show. I'm a ne'er-do-well. So nice little change of pace.
Yeah, this okay. So we welcome the nice guy here tonight.
Yes.
So, All right, let's talk about your photography. Show us what you've got. Like I said, I've been kind of biting at the bit for someone to even just broach the subject of black and white. So I'm all ears, and I know that a few people in here are too. So with that, the screen is yours.
Perfect. Let's dive right in. All right, so let's go ahead and do this and then do this.
Perfect.
Okay, so black and white photography is something that for me has a certain impact. It adds to a certain amount of feeling more so than color in certain aspects. I love color photography. I shoot a ton of color photography, whether it's film or digital. But black and white has always been a special thing in my life. And if there's an opportunity for me to use it to impact the viewer, that's really what I want to talk about today. How it makes you feel. Photos overall make us feel a number of ways, whether it's a photo of a bee on a nice flat flower and it's very vibrant, makes us feel hope, makes us feel happiness. Black and white can have that effect, but it can also get us into other more reflective areas of our life, which I really enjoy. So I'll just dive right in. And I first wanted to cover some of the history on black and white. Some of this I didn't know until I started to research it for this presentation. So some of the origins of black and white photography. This is the first photo that was ever recorded. I have never seen this photo until I started to research it for this project. It was taken from Joseph's interesting middle name, interesting last name, can't say it, not going to butcher it, in 1826. And it was a photo from his window, and it's the first known photograph that we have. You'll notice here that there are some things that I want to point out because we're going to keep revisiting these items overall throughout the talk tonight. There's a gap of white space here at the top. So composition of this photo is really interesting because there's a gap of white space. There's a lot of grain because nothing is clear because I don't know if he knew what he was doing or what lens he was using or lens, if there even was one at the time. And so you get a lot of grain, a lot of pixelation. These are possibly windows on a neighboring section of the home. There's a big triangle or trapezoid structure here in the middle. And then there's also a use of shadows in contrast with the white. And so you get a lot out of the photo, even if you don't know what it is you're looking at. It's almost abstract. So it's almost like a painting of the abstract nature, which I find really interesting. Throughout the decades, there have been a couple of other pioneers that dove into black and white photography. We've got Lewis and William here. They experimented with different techniques, and we'll get into those just a little bit. They produced a higher quality image. There was no color photography, as we all know, but this particular image that we'll go into next was on a silver-plated copper sheet. So that's, if you think film is expensive today, if you shoot film, a silver-plated copper sheet would set you back quite a bit. So I'm glad we've moved on from that. This is one of the oldest photos with that technique used, and so it's of a couple of doll heads, or they're not doll heads. They're some kind of porcelain or clay structure, something or other. That's not creepy at all. That was a pretty terrifying photograph. If you just break it down for yourself, I don't want it hanging in my bathroom. So this process was quite expensive. It allowed you to use a lot of moving parts. I'm not going to bore you with this process tonight, so rest easy. But this was a way to shoot multiple photos at one time. The same thing was for Talbot, the other gentleman who was a part of this. And this is another composition of actually having that negative on that copper sheet to produce with silver iodine to produce a negative. And then you actually get the actual photograph here over on the right side. So you can see the negative in contrast. Both are very stark. I find them fascinating. I think they remind me of, I grew up in a small town here in Texas called Groesbeck. And these oak trees, they remind me of some of the fall seasons that I've seen growing up and some of the winter seasons. So even though it's a photo from 1841, it still kind of feels like home in a weird way, to me anyway. And so over the years, people continue to use black and white photography, even though color is readily available. And I like to think that it's for artistic expression and for impact on the user. And I want to talk about that a little bit here. The effect that it has on us in that void of hues. So there are no hues, there is no vibrance. The human brain is looking for something. We look for stuff in the clouds. We look for things in every area of our lives. And in that, you're going to pick up on more details. I've covered a couple of the details here. So more detail Grayscale, you're going to pay attention to tones and contrasts and notes and hues and textures, compositions. Is there a vignette? How does that make you feel? Is there grain or is it really clear? Is there movement? If there's a subject that's a person or possibly a plant or something along those lines, what does it look like? Is it healthy? Is it sad? Is it, or we identify it as sad, but is it a healthy plant? Is it a drooping plant? Is it a person who's busy and is walking quickly, or are they sluggish? And how does that make you feel? And then shape and scale are also things that we relate to. I don't know about you guys, but when I look at a photo, especially in color, I look at the photo and I'm like, oh, that's nice. That's a nice day. But if that photo was in black and white, I may not have the same thoughts. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about and draw attention to here. We're going to dive into each of these areas really quickly just to see how they affect you and how they and what you actually see when you look at the photo. You're going to see each of these in every photo that we're about to go through. So you'll see tones when we're on the grayscale slide. You'll see clarity when we're on the shape slide. But that's the point, is you're looking at things that you wouldn't maybe normally see if the photo was in color. And so grayscale is another term that you'll see interchanged if you Google black and white photography. Some say grayscale photography. They're the same thing. But it's just going to give you the actual scale from no hue or no overexposed to deeply exposed, your shadows and your highlights and everything in between there. This is also for the mathematicians or the more mathematically minded among us. This is a way to think about it when you start to walk down that grayscale stairway. It's 10%, 20%. You're just adding a little bit more shader to that section until you get to a 90 plus section in those dark shadows. Okay. So contrast here. So contrast is what we're doing as far as like, is there a fade or is it a really rich, deep, dense, dark shadow here? And in here, these three images are they do include quite a bit of contrast. They are turned up on the contrast scale a little bit. I have only included images that I've taken because, with the exception of one slide, and you'll see it because I call it out, but I don't shoot a lot of high fade photography. A lot of my photography, especially in black and white, does lean more higher on the contrast scale, just because of that's my style. That's the way that I like the photo to look. And so you'll notice here you're brought to this light here at the top. This is a place here in Dallas. It's actually in Addison, at the Addison Stone Cottage Theater Center. If you're ever at the Water Tower Theater, if you're ever up in Dallas and you want to go see a play, you'll recognize this landmark up that way. The sky had stars that night, but you can't see them. The contrast is very, very dense. The shadows are turned way up. The highlights are not turned up very high at all, and it's a little overexposed right in there. And so that makes you feel a certain way. It almost looks like a lighthouse or something along those lines. I'd like you to, as we walk through these photos, think about a label or something that it makes you feel, because I think that that's the point, more so with black and white photography than with color photography, is that photo is trying to make you feel something. It's almost like a piece of art or a play or a composition of music. It's trying not to make it grandiose, but it is trying to make you feel something different than if you saw that photo in color. And so with each of these photos, is there anything that jumps out at you that you do feel, or that you're starting to notice, like, oh, the richness, this reminds me of my grandmother's house, or, oh, this reminds me of a lighthouse in a movie I saw, or this makes me sad for some reason, or reminds me of, hey, I'm had too much coffee and I'm very jittery. Whatever it is, it makes you feel something. And I think that that's a really interesting point for black and white photography. These photos are textures, so they do jump out a little bit more. The more contrast you add to a photo, as you all know, the higher those textures become, because it's going to deepen the shadows and enrich the feel of that photograph. And so you can really see them here. This doorway is in New York. I was passing the street and I saw it, and it was broken down and old, and so I just had to take a photo of it. The textures are really old. They make me feel like maybe there was an accident, maybe this place has seen some hardship, but maybe I'm a little sad or resilient. That's kind of the way that my brain thinks about it. The leather here, I'm from a small town. I grew up around ranches and farms and horses, and so this is a very nostalgic photo for me. This is from one of my family members' farms. It's a saddle that's very, very old that just sits out on the barbed wire fence for decor. I guess it was picked up at a secondhand shop, or some neighbor gave it to somebody. I don't know how it got there, but that's where it lives. And these are the hands of an English gardener named Monty Don. You'll know if you're interested in gardening and you want to, go down a rabbit hole, Google Monty Don gardening tips, and that'll take you down a YouTube wonderland of just wonderful, wonderful things. He's a wonderful gentleman, and he runs a show in the BBC called Gardener's World. And so these are his hands. They're beautiful. They remind me of my grandpa's hands. They're great. And so this is just showcasing textures. Composition's interesting, and it's not necessarily something that's just for black and white photography, but I think black and white photography lends the opportunity to showcase something specifically. And so in this photo on the left, most people look at it and say, there's a feather there. And that's what you see. But there's also a grass thing there, and there's the pavement, there's a crack in the pavement, there's other shadows. But most people see that feather, and they're like, that makes me feel some way. And I think that's really nice. Same thing here for the Brooklyn Bridge here at the top, and then Faith and Peace Avenue in a cemetery here in New York makes you feel a certain kind of way. And those are just how the photos are composed. There's a number of ways these all could be composed. They could be changed and shifted, but this makes you feel something from them, hopefully, when you see those. This also is a part of composition. Like I said, these are shadows I'm calling out, but these photos are also composed in a certain way that make the viewer feel something. The contrast is turned up in most of them, with the exception of this one here of this lady drinking coffee, who may or may not be in this chat room. But she's drinking coffee in the morning, and there's a little bit of a fade there. So this, I think, is as close as I come personally to adding not as much contrast. You can see that the black's not as black as this. You can actually kind of make out more of a gray tone there. And these all make you feel a certain way, the way that they're composed, and the shadows that are used. Also the shapes. Like, this is a very interesting shape, the way that this building structure comes off of that. And how dark this is. I think the contrasting shadows and how it lights, like the lightest piece is the main piece, and then the darkest piece is over here to the right. And it's just an interesting photo. It's really weird, and I like it. So that's just the way that you can use shadows to bring out maybe your subject more in a black and white photo, where you can't necessarily turn up the hue or the contrast, or not the contrast, the hue or the vibrance to get that feel. You use your exposure or your highlights and your lowlights. So you take your highlights and you crank them up. You take your shadows, you crank them down. You end up with something along these lines. So that's just really interesting. And the same for vignettes. So vignette, as we all know, is the kind of the fill around the edges of the photo. So we'll contrast that here at the end of this slide. But in this photo, it makes it feel a little more private, maybe. Like you're capturing a moment at a time, a genuine laugh of a gentleman here. It seems a little more elevated. It's not just like a guy laughing. It's like, oh, that's special. There's something about that person that's intriguing, or that's genuine. You're drawn to them a little bit more because the focus is pulled down onto them. It also just adds a higher elegance. I don't want to say elegance, a higher prestige, maybe. Something about them is elevated from just me sitting here on Zoom. Hello, I don't look like this guy does. And so it kind of elevates the class of the photo and has a reflective nature to it. I think the most beautiful thing is at funerals, if there's an ability to take a photo of an individual and then make it black and white, it automatically has a different feel to it. It feels more established, more reflective, more internalized, and more notable for some weird reason in our subconscious. I'm not a psychologist, so I didn't do the work on why it affects us the way that it does, but it does affect us, and I think that's interesting. In the middle photo here, it's a very harsh vignette. The highlights are actually toned down. There's no overexposed pieces, and there's almost a blurry grain to this, almost like this was at a funeral home or at some place like that. It wasn't. It was in my living room. But the photo makes you feel a certain kind of way, which is really interesting. And the same for this gentleman over here to the right side, who is a friend of mine, who's a skater and a YouTuber. Very interesting, genuine, wonderful human being. And it's a photo of him, and it kind of brings you more into his face, because it lowers the background on the sides and the corners. And if you don't think that those are very highly touched up, and there's not a lot of vignette in those, you can see the contrast with this next slide. So look at a corner of one of these photos, and then here we go. So those corners are completely crisp and clear. Even if there's a grain to them, you can make the corner out, whereas these are more shaded and you're more focused on a certain place. So that's how you can use vignette to your advantage in the black and white realm because it is a black or a white color. There's also the opposite, the U vignette. So when you go into the white scale, which is more of like a Renaissance technique, but I won't dive into that stuff. Grain is a tool. Grain is something that's used in film. If you're not familiar with film or you haven't shot film, some folks haven't shot film in the modern age, just depending on when you came on the photography scene. The amount of grain used on a piece of film is indicative of the quality of that film or the professional level of that film. Film has evolved and been priced accordingly based on how little grain is in the film. And then the digital age happened, and we're at a level now with 1080p and 6K and 5K and all kinds of Ks that I don't know what the heck's going on anymore. It's too clear. The picture's too clear. So there is a renaissance of going back to the grain. Some people want to take really granular photos. There's a photo here on the left side, which is of a lady in Washington, D.C. that could have been taken this fall, or it could have been taken 50 years ago. You can't really tell anymore because it's monochromatic. Her outfit does not indicate a decade, and the background is something that's been there for quite some time. And so that's something that's really interesting. So if you're wanting to allow people to experience a nostalgic moment, that's somewhere you can use grain. And I feel like it really speaks into black and white photography because we're hardwired to date that as being older because that's what it was at that time. And we've all come of age seeing photography change over the years. And those older photographs do have that grain in them. I won't dive into the details of digital grain and actual film grain. I can, and I would love to, but I'll keep it nice and high level for now. And if we want to go into the grain talk, we can. The gossip in the grain. The middle photo is just of a tower here in Dallas, close to downtown Dallas. That could have been taken, like I said, 60 years ago or today, this afternoon. It wasn't because I couldn't have turned around the development. I have a dark room, but I can't turn it around that quickly because I have too much going on. But it could have been taken today. It was last week. And then over here on the right side, there's a car, and that makes you feel a certain kind of way as well. That's an older car, but it's also taken with a film grain, so there's a lot of contrasting pieces to that image. Is it old or is it new? It makes you feel kind of funny, or at least it does for me. Anyway, clarity is going to be our next item. Like I said, these cross over. There are clarity things that we could have talked about on every photo up to this point, but these are really interesting. The photo on the left is at a rainstorm in Florida. I was at Navarre, Florida. There was a rainstorm that came in, and that's what the beach looked like. It was very haunting and eerie. I had to take a photo of it, and I stood out in the rain for way too long taking a photo of this stuff. But yeah, the photo turned out great. It was the only one that turned out great. A lot of them were not as great, but this one's nice. It's kind of foreboding and unknown. You know, it kind of makes me uneasy. But that's really interesting because of the fogginess of the top of the photo. Photo here in the middle is of another gentleman who I know, and it's very crisp and very clear, and it gives you a complete shift from, you know, that grainy nature we were just looking at on the previous slide. It's this guy's friendly and it's somehow elevated and important for some reason because it's in black and white, and subconsciously I've had a trigger go off that says this is important. And then over here on the right side, this is one of my favorite photos just of myself personally. I call it the lovers. It's of these two pieces of 35 millimeter film that were close to each other. You'll notice the clarity on this does have a stair step effect. So up by the lens or the bottom of the photo, it's going to be some blur. And then you're going to get pulled into what you should be focused on, which is the two pieces of film that are wrapped around each other in an embrace, or just, you know, a messy desk. Whatever you want to see there is open for you to see. Movement is really interesting in black and white because it almost takes you there. This photo on the left was taken from a digital camera. It's been corrected in post-production to black and white. But it has all of the elements that we've talked up to this point. It does have a vignette. There are textures in it, even though they're not grain. You're looking at maybe the fleece around this gentleman's collar or the texture of the velvet backdrop. But one thing you're not paying attention to is what color is the backdrop. It was a bright, you know, velvety red curtain, and that doesn't impact you when you look at this photo. You see the emotion in this gentleman's face on doing what he loves. And if you're ever in Dallas, this is at the Balcony Club. So if you want to ever check it out, I believe it's on, I want to say Wednesday nights. Don't quote me on that. but it's Wednesday nights, and this guy is there every Wednesday doing his thing. He's awesome. The photo on the right side is taken from a flower bed. It is a couple of yellow flowers that I put the exposure down on my film camera on. I turn my exposure, not exposure, I turn my oh, what did I turn down? My speed. I turned my speed down, and then I took it and shifted. And so those are just some flowers. It has some elements of motion blur and movement. It's now that you know it's flowers, it may look like flowers, but if you didn't know it's flowers, it's very abstract, like that original photo. That could be a wave crashing on the beach. That could be some kind of geometric, rock formation growing out of something sideways. Who knows what that is? But just so you know, it's flowers. But it makes you feel how movement can make the effect different on the viewer. These photos I did not take. I don't shoot too many people in full body. I do shoot portraits and shoot editorial style photos, but not too many people in full body. And I really wanted to showcase what having a full body would look like and what I was trying to communicate for posture. And so you see this little kid here. He's very playful. He's maybe at a basketball court or at a gym, and he's laying down and he's looking up at the camera. It's a very impactful photo. The lovers down in the bottom corner kissing in an embrace. You can feel the motion. The shadows are very dense in that photo. The highlights are also very high in that photo, so the contrast is turned up very, very high. The gentleman here, this is a great use of shadows and of shape and of composition, because he's completely backlit. His shadows are turned up to the maximum. You can make out a silhouette, but the wall, you can still say it says take a lap, and he's just off on a walk. Is he happy? Kind of looks like he has a bounce in his step, maybe. He's on his way, or she's on her way. Wherever they're going. Contrasted by the gentleman over on the bottom right side, who, in my opinion, is starkly the stark lines of the wall and the stark wood of the floor, his long shadow, his downward turned head. That's a clear reflection of posture. He looks like he's trudging on or is mourning something. It's not as exuberant or as like positive as the person who has their chin up. That's a very slight difference in photos. All this person on the right has to do is hold their chin up, and you get a completely different experience. And so that really can showcase how posture affects the photos, especially in black and white. I know it affects them in all photography, but especially in black and white, because everything else is taken out. And I'll dive into a quote here in a moment about that. This is just a reflection of shapes. I'm not going to dive into shapes too much. You can see how they contrast. This middle photo of the black door on the white wall, the contrasting colors, the starkness. It's almost foreboding. Maybe you shouldn't go in there. Maybe it's an escape. Who knows? It just depends on who's viewing the photograph. And then scale. So I've got some photos. This is of a little airplane at the beach. It was taken up in the clouds. I thought it was really, I really liked the way that the plane was flying out of these little clouds. It actually popped out of them. And then it's flying toward kind of a darker area of the photo. That's just an easy way you can communicate a message that maybe it's flying into the storm, or maybe it's flying into something that's foreboding. I don't know why all my photos maybe have some foreboding elements to them. Maybe it's just because they're black and white, and maybe black and white's a little scarier than color photographs. Or maybe it's just me. Maybe that's just how I view the world. But this plane and this image I really enjoy. I like it a lot. It takes me back to another time. It was taken, last summer in Florida as well at Navarre. We've got Half Dome in Yosemite National Park, very crisp, very clear. You can see the contrasting little trees and moving up to the Half Dome itself. That's an island in Hawaii. The contrasting scale. This photo was taken far enough away from the shore to where you really can't see how big that thing is, because all of these small things here are trees. You can't really see that they are trees because it's too far away, but that's a big hill. It's a big place to be. And then down here at the bottom, this monochromatic black and white of just a tree line. It's really interesting. Once again, stark, foreboding, maybe sad. I don't know. But it does make you feel a certain way, and it's a way to showcase scale to make you feel a certain way. Also, too, in this last photo, there's the contrast of the slant of the hill. So you've got this wide open space up top, and you've got this contrast dark shadows down here at the bottom, and then these little trees poking up into that white space. That does something too. Not really sure what it is, but it's interesting. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about shapes. We've talked about what happens in that void of color when color's not around to hold your hand. Apparently, scary stuff happens in that place, but it doesn't always have to be. I wanted to show these photos because it just shows a showcase of what the difference is. This is the quote I wanted to mention when we were talking about taking photos of people. There was a great quote that says, when you photograph people in color, you photograph their clothes. But when you photograph people in black and white, you photograph their soul. And I think that rings true because it just has a different effect on our subconscious. I would love to dive into what that is, if there are any people who have insight into that world, more so than I do, because I just take the photos. I don't know anything more. But I find that fascinating. And that's what I love, I think, the most about black and white is it's how it makes you feel. It does something to us, and I can't put a finger on what it is, but it makes us feel a certain way. You'll see that here in this photo. So this was taken in New York at Grand Central Station. The American flag above this really warm toned interior, this grand chandelier, this great highlights up here at the top. This photo for me, and I'm just speaking for me, is filled with hope, filled with yes, filled with joy, filled with the opportunity and warm fuzzies of some sort, because the photo is so warm, right? And we contrasted immediately into this place. Somebody turned out the lights almost. It's the exact same photo. I just adjusted it in post, and it gives you a completely different feeling. And all that you're looking at is a shift in hue and vibrance. The contrast has been turned up, but no more so than this photograph here. As you notice, the contrast in this photo is quite high on the contrast scale. And so it's not too much, but it does give you a different feeling completely. And I think that is worth exploring. So I challenge you, I'm not done with everything, but I do challenge you to, when you are taking your photographs, don't be afraid to play and shift them into a black and white just to see. Some people will say, I think it was mentioned here that what are you going to do? Why that's a beautiful photo. Why are you going to mess it up with black and white? And it's like, well, just see what it does. Just see how it makes you feel, because it may make you feel completely different. Here's a photo of a handsome lad. This was taken, I think this was taken yesterday. I think we shot it yesterday just really quickly. This is me. And then to see that contrasting feeling, once again, this is also me. And they do something a little bit different, and it's just a way to see it. This guy feels a little more professional to me. This guy, oh, too far. This guy kind of feels like just it's a great little photo of a person. This one looks like just a little more polished, a little more professional, a little more, I don't want to say intelligent. Maybe this guy is smarter than the other guy. But if he's talking about black and white photography, maybe. We'll see. This guy over here, though, he couldn't talk about black and white, but the black and white photograph guy could. So anyway, so how can I use it? What can you do today to shift black and white into your photography, to mix it up, to have some fun? Because I think that's why we're all here. We all love photography. We all love community. And that's what it's all about. That's what I love the most about photography, is how it brings people together. How can you use it? This is my own personal little recipe. It's a basic cookie cutter recipe. It can definitely be expanded upon, but it's the way that I get into what it is that I do if I am going to try something out. I'll take down the saturation. I'll take down the vibrance. I increase the contrast to some level. Just play. Do it to whatever level you'd like to. I add a vignette based on how much vignette I want to add. Normally, I don't take it to 100. I take it somewhere in between. But I do add a vignette, and that gets me to a decent place, to where you'll see a lot in those photos. If there is a vignette, that's probably what the process was to get there. I don't have percentages on those things, because it depends on the photo, as you all know. And then from there, if I want to take it further, I will maybe increase or decrease the shadows within that photo. I'll increase or decrease the highlights, just depending on how flat I want it to feel. You could also add a fade or reduce the contrast if you want it to feel more airy and not as dense and focused. And then you could add that grain that we talked about, just to give it a different feel, maybe from another time. And if for some reason, this is a fun experiment to do, if you have a photo in the wide and it's of little things, like say there's different things in the photo. Say you're at a family gathering and you take a photo of everybody and they're in the line and they're getting their food. Or maybe it's just a table of food. I love food, so it's always a food. But you take a photo of that, and then you do all the things, and you add the vibrance, and you remove the vibrance and the saturation, and you increase the contrast, and you get it to a good place. You add a vignette. Then take it and chop it down. Focus on one thing and see how that crop affects how you feel about the photo. If you've got a photo of your family and it's broken down that way, that'll make you feel a certain way. And then you zoom in to a salt shaker on the table. But it's the same post production value on it, it's going to make you feel different. And I think that that's really fascinating and fun. So that's typically my own personal recipe. This is a basic cookie cutter recipe. It's not, this is how you bake cake, not how you bake, cherry cake. I don't know who eats cherry cake, but maybe someone does. This is just a basic recipe to kind of get you in the ballpark. If you want to play, or you're unsure of what do I do first, this is a basic cookie cutter recipe to get you there. Or you just go to your camera store that's close by, or the internet, and you order yourself some film. If you've got a film camera, order yourself some black and white film. You're going to get a different experience with all of it. If you don't have a film camera and you don't want to buy one because you don't want to deal with it, or you don't want to shoot film, get a black and white disposable. They make those. If you just want to go play, go play. This photo on the right side is a black and white disposable. I buy them from time to time because I like to beat them up. I'll take it. They're not too expensive. I'll take it and I'll just throw it on the ground and I'll smash up the lens a little bit. And I want to get something weird out of it because I can afford that. I'm not going to take my regular lens and throw that on the ground. But for a disposable, you can really sometimes get some interesting light leaks and some interesting stuff if you do that. And so these were all taken on film. I think this was taken on film and actually converted in post. So this was taken on Kodak Portra 160. And then I took it into post-production and I took out the color and I did kind of that thing. I didn't add a vignette here, but I took out the color and I made it the way that it looks. It's very, contrasting. This one was taken on black and white film. I think that was which one was that? I think that was an ISO 400 black and white. I don't remember the vendor, but an ISO 400. Same for this. This was an ISO 400 and this was an ISO 100, I think. So if you're wanting to just see some contrast, I don't know what this one was. It was just in the disposable camera. I forget what ISO it was, or box speed it was, if you will. But yeah, go out and take some photos and just see how they go. If you're in the Dallas area or the DFW or somewhere close by, and you're dropping by, you're at the airport and your flight's delayed and you're like, this airport, and you have some time to kill. There's a great photo shop that I frequent in Garland, Texas. It's called Garland Camera. This is not a plug for them, but it is a plug for them. They're a bunch of great folks. That shop's been there for a very long time. And they're just great. They're genuine. They have all the stuff. They refurbish cameras and then repair cameras. So if you have an old film camera that's in the closet and you want it repaired or want a quote, take it in. They do repairs as well. So they're a part of my community. And then last but not least, if you don't know where to start and you saw all my photos and you're like, that was garbage, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, and you want some inspiration from somewhere else, well, I got your back. These are going to be some inspiring artists that you probably have seen before. Ansel Adams is a very renowned landscape photographer and has taken some black and whites. These are just a few of his massive collection. This one is going to be Dorothea Lange. She took some great photos in the Great Depression. Wonderful black and white photographer, wonderful photographer, period. But her photos in black and white are very moving. So if you wanted just to dive into more of her, she's worth exploring. I think I missed one. No, here we go. Henri Cartier-Bresson. This is one of the most renowned black and white photographers that I have come across. He's a constant inspiration to me. This photograph of this, the geometry of this photo is taught around the world in many photography classes. You may have seen it yourself before, probably so. It's talking about that motion. It incorporates everything that we talked about with the exception of adding a vignette. There is no vignette really in this photo, but the motion in this photo is so clear. There's this spiraling arm of this walkway, this spiraling continuation to pull you back down the stairs. The stairs continue down. There's also some other stairs here. This road turns that way, and the gentleman and the curb goes that way, and the tile goes that way, and the gentleman on the bike goes that way. And so you feel almost pulled to follow this guy or lady, and where are they going to go? What are they doing? But it's a great use of motion and composition and shapes and just everything I talked about. It's a wonderful photo. Same here for these trees, contrasting, a lot of white space here at the top, road pulling you down the road, and then this trees, which could be a heart, maybe, or a monster, or maybe there's a face in there, you see. I don't know, but it's worth exploring. And then this gentleman over here to the right is a great use of posture. So he's in a Jack the Ripper-esque outfit of the time. The treetops are barren. There are no leaves. It looks maybe colder because he's gussied up. He's got his overcoat on. He's got a little hat and a cane, and his posture's a little hunched. And so he kind of feels like a villain for some reason, possibly. And so it just goes to show you some of those elements that we covered. Robert Frank, some of you may be familiar with Robert Frank's photography. This is not a plug for his book. You can find it on Amazon if you'd like. But these are just some cutaways of some of his work. Very interesting photographs. There's a person here in this window. They're kind of clouded here, maybe some judgment. There's the American flag. And then there's a person in the other window that's covered by the American flag. Different style of clothes, too. And so you get a feel for that photo. It does something to you. The hustle and bustle of these people, the elevator and the lady looking up. What is she? Is she hiding something? Does she have something on her wrist? Is she bored and doesn't want to go to work? Who knows? So it kind of contrasts kind of incorporates all the things that we talked about. Diane Arbus, fantastic photographer, started out as an advertising photographer. You'll see this image on the right side from one of the advertisements that she shot, and then some of these other shots that she's more well known for from the editorial things and things along those lines. But if you want some more inspiration, definitely dive in there. And then Viggo Mortensen. So some people may know Viggo Mortensen as an actor. He's been in a lot of movies, but he's also an established poet and photographer. And myself, being an actor and a poet and photographer, he's an inspiration to me personally. And so one of his books is called The Horse is Good. This is not a plug for his book. I am not endorsed by Viggo Mortensen in any way, but you can check it out on Percival Press. So that's his website, and it's got some really stunning photographs in there of horses in black and white. The whole book focuses on horses. I have a really interesting relationship with horses. They speak to me. I was on set today. I had a shoot earlier today, and I was working with horses and things along those lines. But there's some really great photographs in that book of him on a horse, and the way that the shadows and the contrast is there. I don't know if you could see that very well, but this is another excerpt from the same book. So that's just another inspiration to me personally. If you like him, go check him out. If you don't, no worries at all. This is me. If you liked what you saw, if you didn't like what you saw and you just want to say, hey, man, thanks for coming and hanging out, this is how you can get in contact with me. These are all for Instagram. So Sean Allen Stone is my actor page. If you want to follow the acting stuff I do, Sean Allen Stone Photo. You may have guessed it. It's my photo page. And then my company that does a bunch of commercial and narrative and other projects, whether it's videography or photograph, is No Moss Productions. You can also shoot us a line at nomosproductions.com. Just leave us a comment, shoot us an email, say, hey, and we'd be happy to work with you or stay in touch or whatever you want to do. But that is it for me on black and white. I would love to hear some questions if there are any.
Well, I'm going to give people just a second. I'm not seeing any. Let me run through that. I'm going to say I didn't see any, which does not surprise me. Oh, I like that. Karen Riley. Karen Riley is one of my buddies, my pals, and she, when we first started doing the Happiness Hour, Karen brought her notebook, and she takes notes. And I don't know how many notebooks she's up to, but her comment in here was, oh, it flew by me. She's got a lot to think about. So good for you, Karen. There's some nice comments, not seeing any questions in here, but that's okay. I'm going to get you to take down your screen so I can properly thank you for coming and doing the Sean. You know, you were an eloquent speaker, FYI.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I love that you had a beautiful flow. It was very organic and natural, and that's really refreshing. That you were, I mean, okay, you've been trained to do some of this, but loved your presentation. I really did. You know, black and white, I don't purposely shoot it. I turn those photos that I cannot save to black and white. And about a month ago, I was telling somebody that I had you on the schedule for black and white. And he's like, you really should just shoot black and white on purpose. And I just haven't made myself do it. And it's hard because I see everything in color, and it's just so I love the richness and the vividness, the vibrance color brings you. But the quote that you used was, when you shoot in color, you're photographing their clothes. It's so true. It's so true. So
I love that quote.
I don't remember who quoted who.
I didn't tag it. I forget the gentleman's name.
Okay. I just thought, wow, okay, I hadn't seen that or heard that before, but
Yeah.
it was interesting. So, all right. There is Kathleen's question here. You mentioned that you sometimes use black and white disposable cameras. Where can you get those pictures developed if you don't develop them yourself?
That's a great question. That was
Kathleen
that
Kim.
Kathleen?
She's in New Jersey.
Okay,
So,
perfect, Kathleen. Yeah, thank you so much. It's a great question. I personally take mine to if I'm not home because I do travel. I take them to a local place like CVS, Walmart, Walgreens that still does photography. There are places you can send them online. I haven't done that because there's always a Walgreens or a CVS that does them. They do take some time at Walgreens and CVS. Normally at a photo hut or something along those lines, they can turn them around same day, 2 days, maybe. With CVS, it does take typically 5 to 7 days. Just they're a bigger machine. So that's what I've run into.
okay. um, I was gonna say, Kathleen,
Yeah.
I think that the woman that was here, Morgan, their lab would take it. So they did. I know that a lot of, well, running out of camera stores, but I knew a couple of the camera stores here in town would definitely be able to help you out. So I can't believe that you're that close to New York and wouldn't be able to find somebody. All right.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Yeah, if you, yeah, Lindsay's comment was in here says if you love black and white photography and animals, allowed to grow old portraits of elderly animals from farm sanctuaries by Isa Leshko is a beautiful and heartwarming photo book. That does sound nice. All right, with that, Sean, let me close out your session. Thank you for coming and doing this. I didn't have any blackmail on you. So when people say yes, and I don't even have to pull out the stuff that I've got to, all right, I've been saving to make them do stuff like Jane and Karen and Valerie. And there's a handful of women in this room that have to do stuff because I've got, stuff on them. But I didn't have anything on you, and you were just gracious to come in here and talk to a room full of strangers. So I really appreciate that.
You're
So,
so welcome. Thank you all. Thank you all for the kind comments in the chat. You're so welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
right. If you're on Instagram, I know that Sean listed a bunch of his contacts, and I will link those to the video when I post it to YouTube. But if you're on Instagram, you can find him at Sean Allen Stone Photo, and you can connect with him through his website, nomossproductions.com. Next week, James Kelly will be joining us from Scotland to share his presentation, Capturing the Enchanting Faroe Islands, a journey through the lens of a landscape photographer. Until next time, go out and create something beautiful, and I hope that we see you again soon.